Hey, let's make a Nutcracker Gnome. All right, so I'm going to begin with the shoes, and I'm starting with a pair of baby shower booties from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just adding some hot glue, and then I'm going to pop in those little hex nuts. And then once I get those hex nuts in, I'm going to add some more hot glue and add in my wine corks, so one for each shoe. And then on top of those wine corks, once I get those glued in, I'm going to add another hex nut. And this is so that when I place the dowel rod inside of the foam hair roller for the leg, that it will create stability and have grip. Before I add the hex nuts to the top of those corks, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the shoes with fuzzy sock. And I like to do this because I feel like it is a very easy way to wrap them. The fuzzy socks are very stretchy and very forgiving. So I'm taking the top part of the fuzzy sock and I just cut it at where the heel starts. And then I'm going to cut the top in half long ways. And I'm going to use each piece, one for each shoe. So I like to start in the front and just wrap around, and then I'll apply hot glue and just kind of glue it down as I'm moving around to the back. I'm not going to glue everything down all at once. I'm going to start with the back and then work my way around the front and glue the toe down. And then just make sure everything's neat and clean up any loose pieces. And I'm going to do this for both shoes. I will add here also, make sure you don't trim down the top part above the where the leg is going to go. Make sure you don't trim it down too close to the cork because you want that to kind of cover and curl over to look kind of like a more realistic boot. Now I'm ready to start working on the legs, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those wires from the inside of these two medium bendy hair rollers. And I'm going to grab some 6-inch dowel rods or one 12-inch dowel rod and cut it in half. And then I'm just going to insert it inside of that bendy hair roller. And then I'll be wrapping those with some green felt, some Kelly green felt. So right now I'm marking real quick. I don't want them quite as long as they are. I'm going to cut them down about to 4.5 inches. Next, I'm adding those hex nuts that I was telling you about earlier. We're going to go ahead and pop those right on top of that cork with some hot glue. And then I'm going to kind of cover that with the sock. Now I've grabbed that green, that Kelly green felt, and I'm just going to go ahead and measure and wrap the exact width of that bendy hair roller. So I'm just going to fold it in half and cut off plenty, and then I'll trim off any excess. I'm cutting off the excess for both legs and then trimming off any overhang that I don't want on there, and then I'm ready to start building my legs. Now I'm putting those dowel rods back in, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure and add some hot glue into the base of that uh, hex nut, and then insert the dowel into it that's attached to the leg. And then I'm going to let that set for a minute, and I'm making sure that it's sturdy and straight right now. And then I'm going to add the other one. And now to move on to the body. First up, I'm going to be using a 5.5 inch section of pool noodle, and I have already inserted the little hex nut into the body. And I'm going to be using a 2.5 inch styrofoam ball. I'm going to cut it in half and use half of that on top of the head. So I'm just going to round that off and then glue it to the top of that styrofoam. Next, I'm going to wrap the body with felt, a tan colored or skin colored felt, and I'm just using it to measure out how much I'm going to need. And then I'm going to make sure that I go a little bit above that pool noodle into that styrofoam ball area because I know that the nose is going to hit in this area, and I want to make sure that the skin color shows if you end up seeing it instead of the white styrofoam. Now I'm gluing it onto the body, so I just applied a line of glue and I'm rolling it around, and then I'm going to glue it to secure it in place and then trim off any excess. Now I'm going to grab my glitter red craft foam and I'm just going to cut a square that measures at least the size of the bottom of my body, and then I'm just going to glue it right to it and then trim any excess. Now I'm going to take that same glitter red and I'm going to make sure that I measure a little past the bottom of the body. And if you'll notice, I'm only going up to where the actual pool noodle ends. I'm not going all the way up to the felt because I want that skin to show through just a little bit. So I'm just going to make sure there's plenty of excess. About an inch of overhang is a good amount. And I'm just going to use my ruler and make a straight line. And then I used my x-acto knife to cut that. And then I'm going to cut it off and glue it down. And I catch a mistake here in just a minute. I end up gluing it at a bad starting point. So I like to start my material on the seam of the previous material, and so I didn't do that here. So I'm just going to take my heat gun, reactivate that hot glue, and remove that foam, and then just reapply it on that line, on that seam line. Now I'm just going to glue it back down the right way this time. And once I get it glued on, I'm going to trim off any excess, and then I'm ready to move on to my next step. Now I'm marking and cutting holes. Try to be even with this, but I'm marking and cutting holes in the bottom of the body so that I can insert the legs into those. And then I'll add some hot glue to secure those in place. Now it's time to start adding some of the trim onto the body. And first I'm going to go ahead and really secure the socks in place for the boots so that they do not move around. And I want them to really look like boots on this gnome. After I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and grab that trim, that gold trim, and I'm going to start on that seam in the front and just glue my way around. Then I'll trim off a little bit. I'll trim it off whenever I come back around to the front and continue just cutting and gluing. Now at this point I'm going right up the seam in the front, just right up the middle just to hide it. It's a very easy way to hide that line. So I'm just going to add some hot glue right on it and glue it down. And then instead of trimming off the material, the trim, I'm going to go ahead and kind of fold it and turn it, if you will. You'll see me kind of fold it over and go around that way. This will all be hidden underneath the goatee, so you won't even see this, even though it does not look bad at all. Now I'm going to go ahead and trim it off and then glue down the little threads just so that they don't fray or start to run. And I'm going to add a different kind of trim to the middle of the body just to kind of create some interest for the eye. Now that I'm done with the trim on the body, I'm going to go ahead and work on the boots. So I'm going to add that rope trim that I added first, that kind of braided look. I'm adding that to the boots, and I like to start inside, on the inside of the boot, and wrap it around that way. I probably should have started at the back and worked my way around to the front instead of going around the way that I did. So just remember this when you're doing your own nutcracker. You might want to start going around the back first and coming around the front. Now I want to add a little bit more bling to his shoes. So I found this little heart trim that I think is just absolutely adorable. And I'm just going to cut off two pieces and glue them right onto the boots. I will use this in other areas of this nutcracker as well later on. Next up is the arms. So I'm going to take a piece of that glittery craft foam, and it measures about 3 by 6.5 inches. And I'm going to take the width part and fold it up a little bit, and I'm just folding it probably about a half an inch, maybe even a quarter of an inch, and gluing it together just to create kind of a clean edge on that sleeve. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and add hot glue and then just start rolling that foam around those bendy hair rollers. I like to work on both my arms at the same time so that my seams are going the same direction, and you can see that I'm starting on the outside of both of these pieces and going to roll them in. This is important to me so that my seams end up on the inside. Doing it this way kind of gives it more of a finished look when you're not sewing. I'm going to trim off any excess material and then move on to my next step. At this point, I'm ready to add the wood balls for the hands. So I'm going to grab a couple of these and just add some glue right into that cap. And this is on the finished folded side that we created. I'm just adding some glue and gluing both of those in, and I like to make sure that the little holes are visible and not one facing the inside of the arm. That way I can put something in there to hold if I want to. Now I have a piece of gold craft foam, and I'm just going to cut a little piece, and I want to kind of create a cover for the top of this sleeve, this arm, because it's not going to be covered up. So I'm just adding a little more than enough to the top of that, and I'll trim it down once I get it glued on. So I'm just tracing it on the other one so that I have two, and then I'll glue them on and then trim off any excess. Now that I have the top of both of those trimmed, I'm going to go ahead and use this tassel, this gold tassel trim that I found, I believe, at Joann's. And I'm just going to start it at the very edge with a little bit of hot glue and work my way around, adding hot glue as needed. I don't want any gaps in this, but I also don't want to have it just completely wrapped around in it. And then I'll just cut it off and do the same thing on the other one when I'm done. It's time for me to attach my arms, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it right now and see if I like how it looks kind of where I've positioned the arms, and I do. So I'm going to add some hot glue, only about an inch, which starts at the top, just to secure those arms in place. And you'll see me later grab a elastic and wrap it just to really hold on to that while the glue is setting up, because I want it to be secure. And I will say that once the glue dries on the craft foam, it is very, very secure. Now I'm going to start adding the hair to my nutcracker, and I like to do this in strips. So you'll see me cut about 1 inch by 3 inch or 2.5 inch sections. And I like to brush it out really good, and then I'm going to start at the very back of this guy, and then I'll just add on as needed. And again, I like to do this in about 1 inch wide or tall, I guess, sections, with just different pieces going wherever I think that they're needed. Before I do the beard or the goatee and mustache, I'm going to go ahead and work on the hat. So here I've I've measured about a 3 inch tall section. So this is how high the hat is going to be, about 3 inches. And I'm just going to wrap it around his head to see if I've got enough. And I like how much I have. I'm going to cut off that excess, and then I will glue it. And once I've glued it, I'm going to the flip it right side out, if you will. So here I'm cutting out a square section that this circle will end up sitting on. This is where I am flipping it right side out, and I'm going to go ahead and add some hot glue and glue that right onto that square, and then I'll trim off the excess. Now that I have that all trimmed off, I'm going to go ahead and decide what I want to use to cover my little hat. And there's this minky scarf material that I found at the Dollar Tree, but I wasn't sure how accessible that was, so I decided to go ahead and go with the same sock that I used for the boots, which I think also works really well to bring that material to more places on the gnome. So here I'm just kind of checking it out on the base of the hat or on the hat frame, and I'm going to cut off the toe part and get rid of it, and I'm going to use the top part of the hat or of the sock. So here I've glued the part where it was connecting to the heel or the toe of the sock, and I'm going to add a couple of elastics and create kind of a knot, if you will, with that. And then I'm going to flip it right side out, and it's going to create kind of that nutcracker hat look that I'm going for. And then I'll glue that bottom part to the frame that I built for the hat, to that foam. Now that I have the hat made, I am ready to go ahead and work on the goatee. So here again, about a 1 inch uh, tall strip, with it being about 2.5 inches wide. And I'm just going to fold the ends over about 1/4 of an inch in, and cut those off, and I'm going to use those as my mustache pieces. And then the piece in the center that's left, I'm going to fold the edges together and only glue the top of that because I want the bottom to kind of be full and fluffy and kind of free flowing. So here you see me doing that, gluing that top part, and that's what creates that goatee. Sadly, this part was a little bit out of frame, but what I'm doing right here is I have made some clay noses and I'm just inserting a toothpick into the back. I've added a little hole whenever I baked them, um, but you can use a wood ball. They work really, really well. But I just did that to secure that clay nose and make sure that it doesn't fall off at any point. It's just extra security. So here I decided to add a little extra of that faux fur just to be on the safe side. And you can see I'm doing it in sections. I thought that the original piece was a little bit too big, so I cut it in half. And I'm just making sure before I glue it down that I like it. And I do, so I'm going to go ahead and glue it down. And then I'll start adding the goatee and the mustache. Now I'm ready to add the mustache and I like the placement of it, so I went ahead and removed the nose and glued that down. And then I will go ahead and glue that goatee on and then add the nose back, and then I'm ready to work on the mouth. All right, so now we're ready to work on the mouth. I'm going to use a little piece of red, just regular red, not the glitter red, and a little piece of white craft foam. And I'm going to cut that white into little tiny squares, and I'm trying to do my best to show this. It's a little bit difficult, but I'm going to cut that down, and I want to make sure that those little squares fit well onto that red piece, and you'll see me gluing them onto that here in a moment. Now I'm ready to start gluing those little squares onto my little piece of red foam. So I've added some hot glue and I'm going to use my needle nose pliers, trying to keep my hands out of it, which is not happening very well. But I'm going to add some more hot glue and use those needle nose pliers and then just grab and stick those right onto the hot glue. And I didn't add enough on this one, so it's going to end up coming off, and I'll add it back again. Now I'm going to add the top layer of teeth, so the bottom and the top teeth. This is what I'm doing right now, and then that little piece will pop off here in a second and I'll be adding it back. There it goes. Now I'm going to add it back. Now that I have the teeth on there securely, I'm going to go ahead and trim the excess of the mouth and glue it into place. And it's time to grab that hat, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little hot glue to the front, just make sure that it's really secure on there. And then I'll add another little dot of hot glue to the back here in just a second, just to make sure that hat stays on well. And I decided to add a little bit more hot glue just to really make sure that hat stays good and secure. I don't want it coming off. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to kind of give him a good look over. I like the way he's looking, and I wanted to add a little bit more, so I'm going to add that little heart decal thing to his chest. And then I'm going to add some chain or rope looking trim to the top of his hat. I'm going to add two pieces and a couple more hearts. So here I'm adding the hot glue to glue the rope on, and it's important that I don't glue those little hearts on yet. I want to go ahead and add that second piece of trim before I add those hearts, because those hearts are going to act also, they're cute, but they're also going to serve a second purpose, which is to cover up any ugly edges or unfinished looking pieces. So they're going to cover up those ends of those ropes. And there you have it. There is our finished little sweet nutcracker. I hope you enjoyed this class.